This is a great turnout. We've had a real good following. I just want to say a special thank you for all those who came out from Hamden High School. Very impressive group here. I heard they had shuttle bus service now from Hamden Hall to Hamden Hall, right? You're from Hamden High. Off to 15. Very cool. Great. I'm so excited. Thank you for coming. My name is Nancy Mosbach. Welcome all of you to Yale China if you haven't been here before. This is a very special series that we've been hosting for now 3 years, and it's particularly interesting. I'm just off a flight. Half the staff is just off a flight from China, where we've been sort of scattered around doing most of our programmatic work. And our work on the ground really helps us think about what might be most interesting to bring to this community. We just came off a significant arts exploration, and we were able to see the premiere of Tan Duan's new piece called Nü Shu, about the only Chinese women's language that exists in the world and was originated in Hunan province, which many of you know is the actual home of Yale China now for 113 years. So that was quite fascinating, but of course it's hard to be in many parts of where we do work without seeing poverty in China. We are not only in some of the major cities, but also in some of the rural areas, and where the per capita income is something that our wonderful guest today, Xingzui Wang, will share a lot of detail and color about. I think we hear a lot about China's economic growth, and that is one aspect that is certainly covered by the media in the U.S. But at the same time, we're not really hearing in our press and journalistic venues here about what does the face of poverty look like. And that's why we really want to bring this to attention. We hope that this will be a session that will inform, but also to bring a conversation to bear between all of us. It is such a wonderful honor to meet Xingzui Wang and to welcome him to this talk today. I knew that he was the most dynamic, lively person for many, many reasons, but the first reason is the first time I met him in September, I met him outside. I saw someone walking and I thought that might be him. He was locking up his bicycle that he had acquired on day 2 of living in New Haven. He's someone who quickly assimilates, wants to make sure he sees and experiences everything around him, and that's really been in his personality in all of our conversations in the last few months. He is a Yale World Fellow, a program that's been at Yale for now, I think, over 10 years. And he is the vice president of the China Foundation for Poverty Alleviation, CFPA. It's one of the oldest and largest NGOs in China, although that only dates it back to about 1989, if I'm not mistaken. So 1989, just to give you some context, Yale China is one of the oldest nonprofits in New Haven, and we were founded in 1901. So that's just a little bit of context. He has a tremendous amount of experience in the social sector, in the NGO sector. He was also at the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture for 8 years, and before that at the State Council, a state entity of poverty reduction, for 5 years. He has an MBA, so he's very good with managing these types of critical issues, from Renmin University of China, and also he graduated from Beijing Foreign Studies University. He spent time in the UK, which counts for why he has such perfect, beautiful English. And we'll hand it over to him. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. What we'll do is have Xingzui share some thoughts for 15, 20 minutes, prepare your questions, and then we'll have a lively discussion. But if you're burning to ask a question that you just need to ask, feel free to signal to me, and maybe I can bring that into the conversation at that point. But join me in welcoming Xingzui.
Well, it's a great honor to be invited here to speak to you to talk about poverty in China. And as Nancy rightly said that, of course, there's a lot of reports and media coverage about the economic growth in China, but this is one side of China. On the other side, it's still a developing country, as you will see from these slides, that Chinese, in many parts of the country, poverty is prevailing. So I just want to ask, how many of you have been to China? About 1/3, right? And how many of you who have been in China have been to a poor region? You're more, okay. So all of those who have been to China have been to a poor region. So tell me, what poverty is like, or what you have seen in a rural village. Okay, yeah, Jamie?
No electricity, no roads. walking long distances to get to any kind of town or center.
Okay. So when was your last trip to China then?
That was Yunnan in, 10 years ago probably.
10 years ago.
Yeah, I haven't been to too many poor places recently.
Okay. So in today's talk, I will be talking about what poverty is in China, and what are the causes of poverty, and how poverty is addressed. So we have developed a so-called poverty line, and we differentiate rural poverty from urban poverty. Because in early days, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was no urban poverty at all, because most of the city residents were actually working in the enterprises, or the state-owned enterprises. So they were well paid, so they didn't need to worry about their life. While in the rural areas, nobody was taking care of them. So poverty was really referring to rural poverty in China initially. And the current poverty standard is 2,300 yuan per capita, which is literally $1 a day. And measured by this poverty line, there are about 100 million poor. And about urban poverty, of course, the living costs in urban areas are higher. So the poverty line for cities is also higher, so which is about 4,000 or $1.7 a day. So what does a $1 a day poverty look like? This is where they live, and this picture is actually taken from Fujian province, which is one of the most wealthy provinces in the eastern part of China. And this is definitely from southwestern China, like Yunnan or Guizhou province. And this is from Yunnan province, and recently visited one of such homes. And this is their food. From Guizhou province, Miao woman. This is their school. This is also from Yunnan. This is the bridge, the road, the hospital. So when people migrate to find jobs in the cities, they make living like this. So this old lady is actually making living by collecting rubbish. This woman here is actually making a living by washing people's shoes. So why is there poverty? For rural poverty, mainly most of the poverty in China actually concentrates in southwestern and northwestern China. And in southwestern, there's simply a lack of arable land. And in northwestern China, there's no rainfall. So drought is the key factor leading to poverty. And most of these poor regions are located in very remote, isolated regions, so without access to roads, and they're isolated from the outside world. So since that, because of these poor natural conditions, so they cannot make a living by harvesting enough grains to support themselves, and they have very low income, so they don't have any investment in housing, in education, or in health. So that's why a vicious cycle is formed. But here, this picture shows you why poverty is caused in these places. Like in Qinghai and Tibet Plateau, it's insufficient temperature. And in northwestern China, desertified areas, no water. And on Loess Plateau, no water either. And in southwestern China, karst areas, no land. So this lady is actually farming there on this karst land. and high prevalence of endemic diseases in border areas, and ethnic minority regions in northwestern Sichuan province. It's like a primitive society. And these are where the poverty is, or in central and western China, and almost in the deep mountains. So for urban poverty, as I said earlier on, it's mainly because of the reform of the state-owned enterprises. So because the reforms, so the employees were laid off. So and most of these employees did not have much education, and their prime time was during the Cultural Revolution. So when they were actually sent to the streets, they did not have the skills to make a living by themselves. And of course, some of the rural migrant workers who come to work in the cities, they were employed in very poorly paid jobs. So that's also urban poverty is emerging and is becoming a huge problem now. But from 1990s to the year 2000, about 70% of the poverty reduced in the world is actually achieved in China. And this is estimated by a World Bank report. So how poverty is addressed in China, and because of the unique system, so the way that is employed to address poverty in China is also quite unique and it's different from other countries. First of course, poverty is reduced due to this rapid economic growth. And then second, of course, given particularly after mid-1980s, so the economic development itself would not automatically benefit these marginalized people. So the government saw that, and they started to actually build institutions to address the issue of poverty. So I think institutionalization of poverty reduction effort and a strong commitment for the government, and also mobilization of broad social participation in reducing poverty are the three key factors contributing to poverty reduction. So in terms of institution, in 1986, the so-called State Council Leading Group Office for Poverty Reduction was established, and it's headed by a Vice Premier. And the leading group is composed of 33 relevant government ministers. So these are the heads of the leading groups in different periods of time, like Chen Jiesheng, Wen Jiabao, Hu Liang, and current ones, Wang Yang. And then under the leading group, an executive office was established, and so down from the central government level to the provincial level and county and village level. And from at the central level, you can see what this executive office is established and supported by different organizations. So their key functions are actually to conduct research, surveys, and develop regulations and policies. Then to develop poverty reduction programs and budget plans. And they of course, get engaged in social mobilization, and they're there to supervise the implementation of these plans. So the first one is actually to establish the institution, and then when the institution is established, you've got to define poverty, what poverty is. So first of all, of course, they developed this poverty line, and for example, in the year 2000, the poverty line was 865 per capita net annual income. And this poverty line was adjusted annually based on the inflation and the consumer price index. And by the year 2010, this line was readjusted because China's got more money, so they could actually raise this poverty line from 1100 to 2300. So under this line, you can see the poverty incidence actually increased from the 3.6% to 17%. Okay. And then so when this poverty line is defined, then they identify the poor counties. And 592 counties were identified as poor counties. These tables show where these poverty or poor counties are. And you can see Yunnan in southwestern China has the most poor counties. They have 73, and Guizhou have 50 poor counties, and Sichuan has 36. So in terms of regions, like in western China, there are 375 poor counties, and in central China, there are still 217. So this map shows where these poor counties are. Okay, well, this area looks like in central China, but economically, they are in western China. This is central China. So when these the poverty line is defined and they have the poor counties, then they start to identify where these real poor are. And when these real poor households are identified, then they build a database to record these people. So the poor households, people from these poor households, are entitled to special aid from either central government or the provincial government, or both. Then the third measure taken by the government or by the country is to establish this nationwide poverty reduction programs. So in the programs, they will set the goals, principles of poverty reduction in that particular period of time, and they will define the specially targeted areas and target population. And they also will clarify the interventions to address this poverty. And most important, of course, is the policy support. And then so far, 3 such nationwide poverty reduction programs have been developed. The first one is called the 8期扶贫攻坚计划, which means that the government was determined to eradicate absolute poverty of 8 million poor within 7 years, from 1994 to the year 2000. And then currently we have this new 10-year plan addressing poverty. And this nationwide 10-year poverty reduction program are supported by an annual project and a budget plan. So once you have this institution, we call it your GONGO, then you got some people to do this, but now you got money. So the annual plan actually defines how much money is set from the central government to address poverty. This table shows how much money has been allocated from the national government each year. So from the year 2001 to 2012, altogether 280 billion yuan have been allocated to poverty reduction from the central government and local governments, averaging about 23.4 billion a year. Then a broad social mobilization, and this is something which is particularly unique, and I think this can only be done in a country like China, which is practicing a single party system. If they want to get something done, they can really get it done. So sponsorship and partnership. So government departments like our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Finance, and also state-owned enterprises, as well as the Better Off Eastern provinces, are mandated by the central government to adopt, to sponsor, and partner with a particular poor province in Western China. The sponsorship is now 272 government, and SLE sponsors 481 out of the 592 poor counties. So it's called the 机关定点帮扶. And then East-Western partnership. 15 eastern provinces and cities help 10 western provinces. And here is the matching. For example, Beijing partners with Inner Mongolia, Tianjin and Xiamen with Gansu, or Shanghai with Yunnan. And recently, of course, 19 provinces have been mandated to help Xinjiang because of the right, or violence in 2009.
Chongqing, why is Chongqing singled out?
Chongqing,
山东重庆.
well, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean Chongqing's in Sichuan, right?
Well, Chongqing's part, Chongqing's already separated from Sichuan province. So it's an independent province now. We call it Zhixia.
Oh, Zhixia is.
So in terms of what they do in terms of partnership and sponsorship. So first of all, of course, these better off provinces and enterprises, they provide cash donations and gifts in kind. And but more importantly, Eastern provinces encourage you to invest in these poor Western provinces. And they are actually entitled to a lot of preferential policies, including tax, for example. So if a company from Eastern province invests in a Western province, they are entitled to tax exemption for the first 3 years. And they also provide technical and skill training for migrant workers. So the migrant workers from Western provinces receive training before they actually place in a factory or in a company in Eastern province. And of course, these provinces invest in building schools, hospitals, infrastructure, as include roads, water supply, and electricity. International cooperation, particularly multilateral and bilateral cooperation, has been considered a very important factor for China's poverty reduction. Not only because they actually bring in money to support these poor regions, but most importantly is that they bring a new way of addressing poverty. For example, the World Bank actually brought in to China an integrated multi-sectoral approach to address poverty. And this approach has been employed by the State Council Poverty Reduction Project, State Council Poverty Reduction Office, to their national poverty reduction program. So this is about the government's involvement in poverty reduction and the social mobilization. And in my last section of these slides, I talk briefly about the NGO sector. So basically, by the end of last year, there were altogether about 500,000 NGOs. Of course, these were NGOs that have been officially registered with the relevant Chinese authority, which is the Ministry of Civil Affairs. And it is claimed that they employ about 6 million people, but I really doubt it. It's an official figure or data, but most of them are not really employed. They are employed government and retired officials, and they work part-time for many of these NGOs. So maybe less than 1 million, I think. So in terms of roles of NGOs, of course, in China, government is still very strong. They tend to, take care of everything. But I think NGOs in China do play some very unique roles. First and the most important is actually things given they are very close to these people in need, and they work in the communities. So they are always the first to find what these social issues or problems are. So problems in education and in health. And then, of course, with their own efforts, they work harder to find innovative ways to address these social problems and develop models so that other stakeholders, particularly the government and business, can follow these models. And one example is the so-called nutrition project. And malnutrition is a prevailing problem in rural China, and many students in poor regions don't have enough food. And they actually have only 2 meals a day, and normally they don't have lunch. And they've never had anything like milk. I recently went to visit some schools in Yunnan province and asked them whether they had any milk before. Nobody actually raised their hands. And I asked whether they ever have had any eggs, and about 1/3 of them raised their hands. But does not mean that they have eggs every day. They only have eggs during holidays, big festivals like Spring Festival or Chunjie. So organizations like us, we launched a nutritional supplement project about 5 years ago. And these initiatives have been widely promoted through both the so-called mainstream media and also social media. And then came a journalist who launched this so-called free lunch initiative. And it was broadly participated by those internet users. And I think millions of people participated in that project. So eventually it drew the attention of the central government. And when Jiabao says that we got money, we didn't know that there was such a huge problem. And now we got the money, so we are going to sort out this problem. So the Chinese government at the moment is actually allocating about 16 billion yuan a year to provide free lunch to all of these primary school students. So I just want to cite this example to show that NGOs, of course, their ability and capacity are limited. So what we can do is to actually identify social problems. We found ways to address these problems so that other stakeholders can follow and also address this problem at a much larger scale. And of course, NGOs provide tailor-made service to the community. And some of these services could not be provided by other stakeholders like the government. And of course, NGOs also do bring in new and additional resources. So for example, from the year 2007 to year 2012, NGOs altogether raised about 470 billion yuan. And from this diagram you can see about 22.45% were spent in poverty reduction. So that means NGOs spent about 105.5 billion yuan in poverty reduction. So I think, of course, as a result, so a lot of achievements have been made in terms of raising the living standards of these poor, and the health and education conditions of these poor regions have been improved. So I will stop here and take questions from the floor.
I think you can tell by the attentiveness of the audience that this is information that we really it's affecting us personally as we look at these numbers and have a better understanding. The burning question for me, and I'll ask two questions and then open it up to the audience, is you're very internationally minded, you went to the finest universities in China, you have an MBA, why poverty alleviation for you personally? What motivates you? Was there some instance in your professional career or development as a young person that committed you? As we see the numbers here, there are only supposedly, as you suggest, 1 million people working across the board in this type of non-governmental organization infrastructure. So what motivates you and what brought you to this career?
Well, this may be related to my personal experience. I still clearly remember that when I was in the junior middle school, we call it, 初中, and then we had to pay some tuition. I think it's 3 yuan. But at that time,
for the whole year?
For the whole year.
Okay, 3 yuan is 50 cents.
50 cents, yeah. But at that time in China, poverty was everywhere. Even I'm from a province, which is also a rich province, Zhejiang province. But even that, before the reform and opening to the outside world, we were tied to land, and as a result, actually, you were only allocated the grains harvested from the field. So, and other economic activities were not allowed. And you were only allowed for each household to raise one chicken. And of course, a chicken does not lay eggs every day. So for every 10 days, a chicken maybe will lays eggs about 7 eggs. And this is mainly for household consumption. So there's no actually cash for most of the households to spend. And that's a reality. So I could not afford even pay 3 yuan to cover my tuition at the junior middle school. And then I was very lucky to pass the college exam, and I got enrolled by Beijing Foreign Studies University. But what worried me most was actually how could I get to Beijing? I didn't have cash. And then, after I graduated from university, I think that I needed to do something to help those people who were in a situation similar to mine. So that's why I deliberately chose to Ministry of Agriculture, which is working in rural China. And then later on inspired by some of the leaders working in the poverty reduction sector. So I started to transfer myself to work for Poverty Reduction Office. So I think my personal experience actually says for why I choose this area to work on.
Thank you for sharing that. My second question before opening it up is, you've been here now since August, if I'm not mistaken, as a Yale World Fellow. What do you think has been the greatest misperception about poverty in China and that you've come across in terms of your conversations with so many people? What is the greatest misperception?
Well, I think that there's a pretty good understanding of poverty in the Yale community. I've been talking to a number of students and also some faculty over the past three months, and it seems that they all have some level of understanding of China, because in some other occasions, actually, when people will ask me questions about what China is like, they all believe that China is like a developed country. But here I think Yale is strong, that there are a lot of courses about China. So I think either students or the faculty have a really good understanding of the true picture of China. So I don't think I haven't encountered any misconception about
You're too good to us. Let me open it up to the floor. I have Steve here, and then I have you afterwards. And please just, Steve Alderman, lawyer in New Haven, please.
In the urban areas, is there a group of working poor? I'm wondering how, and is it a large group? In other words, people who they work and they make more than they may make more than the poverty level, but in reality they are either in poverty or near poverty. And how large a group is that?
Well, there's as compared with rural poverty, I think that urban poverty reduction effort is really lagging behind. That's mainly because that there's no single organization or institution addressing this issue, and the research in urban poverty is also very weak. So I don't think I have this kind of data there. Yeah.
In other words, if it's not obvious, like in the rural areas, it sort of gets not counted as much.
That's right. Yeah.
Your name and identity.
Minhua. Actually, I've been doing this volunteering work for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And I witnessed how China changed and developed. But my major concern is, I notice how much money is being donated or putting effort in this project. But I don't see many of progress in terms of how the money, how the projects being monitored, supervised, which means if we give you $1 million, how the $1 million is being distributed, what effort the government has put into this to make sure that money is actually goes into this effort.
And if I
And
may
this is our
add,
major concern.
are there any concerns or stories of corruption in the area? If I may push on that a little bit.
Okay, well, this is the question, or people have always been questioning, either towards the government or towards the NGOs. So for the government is that actually was self-centered and system. That means that, for example, they got the money and they developed the plan or the program and the plan. Then these plans are implemented by the government themselves, and then they monitor and evaluate the progress of this implementation. So in China, we got to say that the government is actually both a referee and a player.
So it's all within its own system.
Own system. So, but of course, the higher level government authority will go inspect, supervise, and check the lower level ones. But even if they identify the issues or problems, they handle these problems internally. 叫内部处理. Okay, rather than to actually publish or disclose such information publicly. Because if they do so, you are their higher authority, and you are also responsible for that, and people won't do that. So what we are thinking, we advocate for changing this kind of practice is actually what government, you have the money, and you of course you develop the plan, but more importantly, you develop the criteria of how the money will be used. Then you open for competitive bidding or collecting proposals from the NGOs or other development practitioners, so that you will outsource the funds for the NGOs to implement. Then you come in to monitor and evaluate. Then, because you are the referee, right? You are not the athlete or player anymore. So if there's any problem, you publicize these problems through the media. And if people are not doing their job, you blacklist them, so that they will never get any share of these funds. And from the NGO perspective, I think what people will later on raise this Red Cross scandal. And but Red Cross, just want to clarify that Red Cross is different from many other NGOs. In China, they call it 人民团体. So they don't need to get registered. And they're not subject to any review. And their honorary chairman is the president of the country. So they are different. They don't need to actually report to anyone. So it's not unusual that they will keep all the information for themselves. But for the NGOs like us, the law and the regulations require us to disclose information, and we need to submit annual reports based on the format provided by the relevant authority. And all the accounts will be audited every year, and such audit reports will be published in a designated newspaper or website.
It's very encouraging. Sounds familiar too. I would love someone from Hamden High School. Does anyone have a question? Yes, sir.
Sure. I was wondering if, what is the chance of someone born into poverty to escape poverty, and what's being done to increase this chance of happening?
that also reminds me of a time that a World Bank task manager and I were in a deep karst mountain area in Guangxi, Zhuang Autonomous region. And he was pointing to these high mountains around us and asked Xingzui, do you believe that it's possible to get these people out of poverty just through farming the land, which is extremely limited? That's why he strongly believes that the World Bank project should be investing in health and education. So I personally believe that the only way for these people to get out of where they are living and to get out of poverty is through education. But of course it takes long. Education is at least 10 years, right? 10, 12, 15 years. And with about 2 decades or 3 decades of the poverty reduction effort, the primary school enrollment rate is more than 95%. So this is really encouraging, and I think that the fundamental way to escape out of poverty is through the education. Like you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Right, so in your presentation previously, you talked about the relationship between NGOs and government organizations, and from your descriptions, so far it seems to be mostly cooperation, and they seem to be working. It seems to be a happy marriage in terms of poverty relief, at least. But we know that the NGO sector and government, it's not all roses and peaches for NGOs in China, and perhaps poverty relief is a sector in which NGOs don't face so many restrictions compared to disaster relief or health, where the government has stronger censorship. But in your experience working for the NGO, have you come across any conflicts between how the government wants things done and how the NGO would like things done? And has there been control or just any sort of unhappy cooperation, where cooperation hasn't happened between government and NGOs?
Yeah. Well, in the early years of the NGO development, you can see that most of the Chinese NGOs worked in 2 areas: poverty reduction and environmental protection, because these areas are not affiliated with politics. So the government were happy to allow these NGOs in these sectors to grow. But now you can see that a lot more NGOs are involved in advocacy and in legal aid. And there are some activists there. So these are actually the areas where there are confrontations between the NGOs and the government. And because of the experience in other countries like in Central Asia and in the Middle East, so the so-called Arab Spring and the Color Revolution, I think really frightened the Chinese government. And a lot of restrictions have been placed on the NGOs. But this current government is working very hard, trying to encourage a healthy and faster growth of the NGOs in China. But of course, there are different opinions about this. So the current premier, I think he understands the roles of the NGOs. So we're trying to sort out this problem by differentiating different NGOs. Some are politically engaged. So these politically engaged NGOs will still be subject to stricter restrictions. So they need to have to go through a government government-health organization called the Yale World Fellow. While NGOs like us, who are only involved in humanitarian development, will be subject to much loosened control or management. So eventually this government health organization will be removed. And in terms of our actual daily conflict with the government, of course, that's inevitable. And we, the foundation, actually underwent a very bold and radical reform in late 1990s. And we used to be called GONGOs, government-operated, non-governmental organizations. 这叫官办非政府组织。What we did was to actually remove G from GONGO. So we started this de-GONGOing process. And as a result, we obtained our independence financially and in terms of human resources and also in terms of project operations. So we are coexisting very well with our parent government-based organization. But in daily operations, there are conflicts. And if they are very strong, they will stick or persistent in their position, then sometimes we have to compromise. And for example, last year, we launched this called 3 pound a day. That's actually asking people to experience a day of life with only 6.3 yuan, which is the poverty line. The poverty line is 2,300 yuan per year per person, but it means 6.3 yuan per day. And in cities like Beijing, Shanghai, can you live with 6.3 yuan a day? Yeah. In Shanghai, I think one subway ticket, one way is 3 yuan, right? And the two way is 6 yuan. Yeah. So I can do nothing about it. And we launched this campaign, and it was very well received by both the public and the media. But then it's in November last year, and you know the 18th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party was planned to convene in November. So people were really worried it might arise social instability or upheaval. So the head of the State Council of Poverty Reduction Office came like, you have to call that a stop. And he was really furious about this. So we had to stop it. Yeah. But these are kind of things that are not our principles. It's only a routine or a kind of campaign or activity. We won't compromise our principles. For example, the staff or management won't be appointed by the government. We elected, they're elected or appointed by the board. So if they come to interfere into this area, of course, we will use the board to work against them. But it seems that our government, health organization, really understand these kind of things, so they don't interfere. But in many GONGOs, who are still GONGOs, of course government control them. And such conflicts are inevitable.
May I try to get a final question from the audience? Yes, please.
I think relatively speaking, NGO is new to China. And in the process of your work, how do you feel the public, general public understand and comprehend the conception of NGO? And because of the huge resource or let's say disclosure of the internet, it seems to me that there is a growing distrust towards the government among the general public, like in China. So do you think this is an opportunity for NGO, or because you have to collaborate with government closely and you have to follow their control, it also affects your credit in the general public?
So I don't know if I understand your question correctly, but of course there's still a lot of restrictions regarding the NGO management. But I think overall the environment is more enabling than it used to be. And the government has seen the important role that NGOs can play in solving these social issues or social problems. And one example has been the rapid growth of the foundations, particularly private foundations of the past 7 or 8 years. So the new foundation management regulations was introduced in 2004. Because before that, there were no private foundations at all in China. But after that, over the past 7, 8 years, altogether about 2,000 private foundations have been established. So I think overall, there's a bright future for the NGOs, and the environment will be better for them to develop and grow. But of course, there are occasionally different kinds of war in different periods, and central leadership may have different opinions or views about the roles of the NGOs. So the policies may be changing as well. But I'm pretty confident in the current government that huge improvements will be made to help the NGO sector to grow. But regarding the crackdown on the internet, I don't know what the reason behind. There was such recently a huge crackdown on this, what they call big Vs, 大 V, of the Weibo users, like an American or Chinese American.
Blog sites.
Yeah. That's because mainly, and on the one hand, of course, they crack down, but on the other hand, it seems to me that Xi Jinping likes transparency very much. So the entire court proceeding of the Guoxilei case was broadcast live through Weibo. And his very first trip to a poor village in Hebei province was also broadcast live through Weibo. So maybe they're just kind of afraid that the so-called opinion leaders, will cause social instability. But in terms of using social media to promote charity and philanthropy, it's not a problem. We have been using Weixin and Weibo a lot to promote our campaigns.
Xingzui, thank you so much. Jamie,
Can I ask just
final
one real quick
course.
question
Yes.
about
I've never
it?
seen no Jamie.
So I want to know, how did you get to Beijing?
Yes, that's
You said you had no money.
John.
How were you going to get to
Okay.
Beijing?
Yeah. So, the story went on. So I went to the County Education Bureau to submit my application to get their subsidy or support. And I waited for 1 week, and eventually came back to me saying that they didn't have such money in the budget. So I had to rely on myself. So, and my mother went to borrow from relatives and friends, and instead she sold a pig. Yeah, so got some money. So, and of course, a discount was given to students like us. So it's about 60% of the normal price. So with that money, I went to Beijing.
The rest is history.
Xingzui, thank you so much for sharing that, your story, and you're a wonderful communicator, and I think that you just epitomize what Yale China tries to do, and the U.S. and China bridge, and making it clearer and more transparent and easier to understand. Thank you so much. And this is just a small token. We didn't want to give you something heavy because we know you're going back to Beijing. But Gish Jen was someone we featured last year, and she wrote this wonderful book called Tiger Writing.
Thank you.
About the self and culture and the interdependent self, and also some note cards from this current exhibit, which are also available for purchase, which you can write home to your colleagues and friends. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we would please join me in thanking. We also have, I want to thank Xingzui Wang for sponsoring this wonderful series, and they have also donated to us these wonderful tablets for translation purposes. So we're going to do 3 picks, actually. The first name will be for the person who receives this, and then we also typically have a meal with our guests. We won't do it tonight, but I'll pick 2 more names, and if you're interested in joining, maybe I can try to get Xingzui to join us for lunch one day. 2 other people from the audience can join us for lunch to follow up on this conversation. So these people actually have tickets? We are so advanced here. Hamden High School, they're like, I'm on it. 236-108. 108. Oh, happy birthday. And 2 more people, if you're free to join us for lunch. At some point I have, ooh, this is tricky. Oh, yeah. Okay, 236-113.
Here.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, we'll arrange at a convenient time if you'd like to join us for lunch one day. Okay. And 236-111.
Oh, that's me.
Oh, okay, wonderful. So let's get your names, you can give it to Tiffany. And please, where the house is open for another 15, 20 minutes. And volunteers, if anyone's interested in volunteering with Yale China, Magdalene Lawhorn is our volunteer coordinator. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Thank you.